Welcome back, pop culture nerds, to Digital Dissection. Today we welcome a highly respected creator, engineer, and designer within the gaming industry. During his career, our guest contributed to educational technologies, of which you might remember the Oregon Trail. He would go on to create one of my family's favorite games, Rocket Jockey, and would later spend 24 years with Microsoft, developing technologies for the MS-TV, Xbox, and the HoloLens. We welcome to the show, Sean Callahan. Sean, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you. I feel like this is a journey for us that's several decades in the making, because when we got the Rocket Jockey demo as kids, we were all enamored by how delightfully violent that game was. And not in a gory sense, but the idea of humiliation was just driven into us back in 1997, and it never left. But I don't know if that's exactly what you're going for with that game.
We were definitely going, maybe not, the humiliation might be a little strong, but we were definitely going for cartoon violence. Nothing gory. No, I mean, we did have some people suggest putting blood in. It's like, no, we want it more like, Wile E. Coyote, Roadrunner, or Three Stooges, like painful, but cartoon painful. So that was very much the intention.
Yeah, more slapstick than Mortal Kombat. It was a
Exactly.
really good direction to go with.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It was humiliation, but with a sense of class, I think. It was very, and that's why we loved it so much, because of how we actually grew up with the Three Stooges, believe it or not. We had a couple of VHS tapes, but I don't know, there was something about that aesthetic that just stuck with Nate and I. So really quick, for those of you listening to the show who've been with us for a while, you might notice that we have some other folks joining us as well. Obviously, Joe and I are here week over week, but we also welcome back my brother, Nate Benke. Nate, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Al?
We're doing pretty good. Both of our teams won their openers in the Major League Baseball, which doesn't happen always. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Sean, I do have to apologize. If you are a Twins fan, I don't wear the Yankees cap to, basically make you upset. I know that there's some bad blood there.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm a fair weather fan of Twins. Love them. Same Vikings too, but it's not my main thing. So I'm okay. It's not a problem. Not a problem.
Hey, it was tough for like the early 2000s. I had a friend who was a Twins fan back in the early 2000s, and I don't think the Yankees lost a game for several series. We won't keep going on that path though. Mm-hmm.
But I'm more of an 87, 91 Twins fan than other eras. But
the Chuck Knobloch, Kirby Puckett World Series.
2 years ago in the World Series.
Yeah.
I watched the White Sox in person beat them in that World Series season, but I got to see all of the all the major players there. But we got to. This one, my older brother, he likes Robin Ventura because he had like a 3-run home run in that game.
Yeah,
and then we tease him relentlessly because he got beat up by Nolan Ryan. So, in the end, you Twins fans won that season, anyways.
You have to make fun of that moment every time we see our brother, because, I mean, I think Nolan Ryan, even though he was in his 40s, he got like 30 punches in before the rest of the team got there to break it up. So, still got it, But Sean, without going too far in another tangent, one thing we like to do on this program is really get into the journey of our guests. And one thing we've noticed with video game development, or even software engineering, whichever way you want to look at it, it seems like there's a lot of different in routes there. And we wanted to know a little bit more about maybe what your plan was from the beginning, going through education and heading down that path. Where did it really begin for you?
So I'm kind of unusual, and I started at an extremely young age with computers, or at least extremely young for my era. I first used a computer terminal connected to a timeshare system when I was in third grade, so 8 years old, which now is no big deal, right? Kids start before preschool, but back then in the early 70s, that was pretty unusual. And I was, immediately enamored with it. It was a case where my teacher noticed that I was really interested in computers, electronics, and the library and stuff. So she brought me up to the 6th grade classroom that had the timeshare terminal. And I got to try it out, play a couple simple games, and maybe write a little program to print my name out. And from that moment on, I went from, what do you want to be when you grow up? I went from being an astronaut to a computer person. And I had no idea what that meant, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. So I was kind of lucky, like right away. This is my path. And then fast forward to 6th grade, when I was actually in the class that had the computer terminal, we were learning basic programming, but more importantly, we got to play games. And we played Oregon Trail on the teletype. So hunting was type the word bang, and how fast you type is how much meat you got for hunting, and dying of dysentery and all that stuff. And that was really kind of the point where now I know what I can do with computers, and this is really what I want to do. And the bonus of that was then I discovered that not only can you play the games, but you can type list and get a listing of the game, so you can see exactly how they worked. And now I knew how I could make my own games, and I was really off and running from that point. Long journey to get to Rocket Jockey, but that was really the start of now I'm going to make games on a computer, and I can do this for the rest of my life. So that was kind of the first couple steps.
I've heard of a couple projects that we've talked to creators that have made like comic books or maybe like an early screenplay if they were writers. Do any of these early games still exist, or can you tell us about maybe some of these early games that you made?
Well, the ones I made, they're pretty simplistic. So I still have listings of them, but just dumb stuff like my cousin had just taught me how to play blackjack. So I'll do a blackjack game. So just that level of stuff. And again, it's 110 baud teletype. You really can't do all of them that much. It's all simplistic text based. Mm-hmm. But I had notebooks full of these games, and I did a lot of ASCII art too. I'd sit at the typewriter, type stuff in, you make pictures, and then do print statements to do that. And it was pretty simple, but I was just I was obsessed with it, and I spent a ton of time doing it. The games themselves, whatever. But it's it's 11-year-old making games. It's nothing too sophisticated. But
yeah, well, hey, you never know. Sometimes you might be sitting on that that Harry Potter idea that you threw in the trash can, and now we're thinking about pulling it back out. I mean,
yeah, it's possible. Yeah, I have it for my own enjoyment to go back and look at. But yeah, I don't think there's any hidden gems in there necessarily.
Yeah,
that came maybe a little bit later.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'm always interested in, because I worked in the engineering staffing world for about 5 years and read through a lot of resumes, because you're trying to fit sometimes the smallest experiences with, creating new technologies. And in your career, when I followed kind of some of the breadcrumbs on LinkedIn, I noticed that you did a similar path to some of the engineers that I worked with in the past, where you're not necessarily focusing solely on one thing, but you might take one role, learn a little bit there, move to another one a few months later. What was your approach to just software engineering in the beginning, or programming in the beginning? What was that journey like for you?
Well, it depends what you mean by beginning. Like beginning of my professional career, or my beginning of my programming obsession.
Yeah, I guess we could do the earlier side of that. I mean, I'm interested in both ultimately.
For me, it was. I always wanted to, well, I guess this actually applies to both, but for me, I always wanted to have done one of everything. I wanted to learn, something that I hadn't done before, learn how it's done, master it, and kind of move on to the next thing. And that's been my path through my entire career, even before doing it professionally. It's like, on the teletype, learning how to print out letters on a punch tape, the yellow punch tape that came out of the teletype, or jumping ahead to the Apple II. It's like, how do you do, some kind of animation or do disk protection or whatever it is. I always wanted to find that next challenge, kind of master it and move on. Because things always seem, before you know how they work, before you've done something, they seem mysterious. And then once you've done them and kind of, okay, I've mastered that, check on to the next thing. It takes the mystery out of it, and you're looking for the next challenge. And then fast forwarding into my career, like at Apple or Microsoft, even though I was at Microsoft for so many years, I switched groups quite a bit and jumped from just very, very different projects just because I was looking for the next new challenge. So that was always the motivation. Some people, like to be in one place and have their thing and stick with that, and that's great and fine for a lot of people. But for me, I'm always like, okay, what's the next challenge I can take on? And so that always pushed me from group to group, looking for the next thing.
Yeah, I've heard about that from quite a few contractors that I used to work with, where it wouldn't even be tell me about what the job description is. It would be about what technology am I working on? Like what does this contribute towards? Would that be in line with what you're kind of saying there? Like you would be a little more focused on that than what's actually in the description itself?
Absolutely. What's the new technology, new challenge. I mean, it's both a push and a pull. Once you're in a group and you've done something, then you kind of get that that smell on you. You can't get off it, and you're always stuck working on that thing and doing maintenance and getting dragged back in and doing the same thing over and over for release after release or product for product. So it's sometimes you want to escape just to get to the next thing, but then also yes, it's that you go to a group. Like this group is doing embedded devices, and I'm doing low level, blah blah blah, or this other group I'm doing an internet browser, or doing video compression, decompression, whatever it was. Yeah, it was very much what's the interesting challenge and what can I kind of bring to it. And then for me working, maybe a bit of a tangent, but at Microsoft I worked remotely the entire time. So I had to find, interesting challenges that were big enough for my grade level that was, they're appropriate. And then I'd kind of take off over myself and do remotely as well. So that was another factor for projects I picked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's got to be an interesting dynamic to shift to because, most of us didn't have to do any kind of like technology, or at least the three of us joining you here today. We didn't have to work on technology remotely like that. But from your experience, working in a in-person location to going to remote, were there any challenges that you weren't really prepared for or things you had to adapt to?
Yeah, I mean, so I did most of Rocket Jockey remotely. In fact, because back then in the I guess early '90s, mid '90s, there was no real. I mean, internet was a relatively new thing. People didn't have T1 lines. I had like an ISDN modem, if you know what that is.
Yeah.
It was really tough and so super slow connection. And then I was like one of the few people that was actually working remotely. I was such an anomaly until these last couple of years. I was the face and name that nobody really knew off in the distance. So it was very challenging. And there's obviously the day-to-day stuff of before the days of Team and Slack and all that stuff. Talking to people is tough and getting people to reply to emails. So there's tons of challenges with it. But man, you can be really, really productive when you're off by yourself. Just get a big project that you're doing your own thing on. You can get a lot of things done working remotely. People are all discovering that in the last couple of years. That was my secret for a couple decades.
How did you submit your content over that you were writing? Was it all over? Did you do it over the line there? Was it or did you just have to ship a hard drive over or something? Was it? So
we had primitive source control back then. So I would actually submit things. Kind of like we do now. We didn't have Git or anything like that. But in the case of Rocket Jockey, I was actually work remotely for 3 weeks, and I'd fly in and spend a week out in San Francisco and work there locally. So that was more of a, not sneaker net, but physical transport a little bit more. But then, more recently, then it's just all been online. But
So I guess it's like you said, I'm trying to picture what working remotely is like pre all the COVID stuff, because it's become very, like you said, it's what we do now. We're so used to it. So when you have these larger projects that you're working on, would you be all right with sharing what parts of major things like Oregon Trail that you worked on directly, or where you had a direct impact on? Tell us more about that, because as someone who we played Oregon Trail growing up, and as a teacher who taught social studies and needed a few days to buy some time, definitely had the students play Oregon Trail with me. So a lot of young fans doing out there.
Which iteration of Oregon Trail did you work on?
Okay, so my Oregon Trail work was pre-remote. That was when I was still in Minnesota. So I used to work. I worked for Minnesota Educational Computing Corporation. Right. So they used to be the big timeshare system that one of the timeshare systems we used to play on as grade schoolers. And then I later on ended up working there when they switched over to doing Apple II development, Mac development. So I was obviously not there for the teletype version. I was not there for Apple II, but I worked on the first Macintosh version, and then that got ported to Windows as well. So
it's still the mostly text-based one, right? With the prompts and stuff, or was it the one where because we had the first graphical DOS one where it was, you pulled the mouse around and started making shots and stuff and I played the previous ones too, but
it depends what year you had it. So there's kind of different time periods. So the Macintosh one was fully graphics. I did the animation system, all the UI system. I did the hunting game on the Mac version.
Did anybody actually prefer the number key one, or was there like I'm talking about at the school, we're playing together and it's they'd always have one kid hitting the space bar or whatever, and one kid would just Because if you were really good at it, you could use like the num key and you were pro. But like some kids just like sit there and going, left, right, forward,
Yeah, so if it was a DOS version or Windows version, it depends. The DOS version was before my time. The Windows version, they ported our Mac version to Windows. So I don't know. I mean, the one I did was mouse-based. You basically moved the little reticle around and fired at the buffalo.
That's the one we got at. That's one we had actually. So that was
okay.
You
were playing the PC port of my work for the Mac version because the Mac version was done first.
Okay.
At the same time, so at that same time period, Apple had given us some money to do a multiplayer network version called Leg and Train 1848, I think it was. So another guy did all the networking stuff, and I did the bulk of the single player version. So all the graphics, animation, all that stuff was my work, and then we had a couple of people ported some of the game loop algorithm stuff that had been done for other platforms.
Did you do anything besides Oregon Trail? Like, 'cause I remember back in the day, they used to have a big stack of like discs in the computer lab at the school, and it was like, lucky kids got the 4 copies of Oregon Trail, but then there was like Odell Lake and Pizza to Go and like all these other ones.
I did. So I started in fall of '89 there, and I did Word Munchers, Number Munchers, or I worked on Word Munchers, Number Munchers, and then Oregon Trail. And I was just a blip there, really, in the long history of Oregon Trail. And then they sent us out to the Apple Developers Conference when I was there, and then when I was out there, I interviewed at Apple and got a job in their system software group. So I was only at MEC for I think 6 months total.
Okay,
just long enough for those 3 games.
Creating all the anxiety in us kids, where you're hopping around trying to hit all of that before the muncher gets you.
Yeah. That was that. And so all the animated cutscenes between the levels stuff, I did all those. I mean, artists did the graphics, and then I did all the animation on those things too. That was using my animation system, and then I did all the coding for those too. So
how many chomps? He does this. It's like it's all you. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, you're testing my memory, but yeah, I mean, anything that was animation related in those games. Was,
okay. Very cool.
It was like the idea of like reaching towards a cat and trying not to get bit by it. That's how I always remembered that chomp motion. It was like, yeah. But yes, and it's not trauma either, as Nate pointed out. It was just that was what we had at the time.
It's pure anxiety is what it is. It's that as you're playing the game, like you're in the classroom knowing like when I lose, I've got to get off the computer because the next kid wants to play. And as long as you're there, you got to keep going. So like I was a pretty good kid at the time, but even then, I mean, the anxiety will get to you and you miss or you screw up and it's like not your turn anymore. You don't get to play for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's funny. I mean, it's not obviously none of this is my experience with it, right? I mean, for me, the stress was Oregon Trail. When we type the word bang, okay, I got the B and the A, and you got the N and the G. I mean, it's just different era, but same stresses. And
it was like second and third grade for me, where it was like we only had one computer in the back of the classroom, so it was like you got to take turns. But when you lose, it's the next kid's turn. So
yeah. That's how I get to feel really old too. Like when at Microsoft, when you switch groups, you kind of have to send a little bio paragraph, and I'd always throw the Oregon Trail thing in, and I get these emails back. Oh, I played that when I was a kid. I love it.
Thanks, but no, thank you.
Did anybody figure out Oregon Trail on that version that you pick the teacher, right, and you just go there and just load up on ammo, and then just hunt and hunt and hunt, and then sell everything off? Like you just go like trading around to get all the items you want, so you end up as rich as a banker. And then you stroll in the Willamette Valley with like everything in the highest score.
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody figured that one out
we routinely killed 14 to 16 times what we rightfully should have been able to carry with us. So we led mass extinction events playing the Oregon Trail. I don't know if you've heard that before or not.
I mean, it's basically what happened eventually anyway, right?
I was going to say,
it's out of there. So
it's the embarrassing thing where you go, it says like you've hunted 4,920 pounds of food, but you can only carry 200 back to the wagon. Was that some of your humor in there going, hey, what a waste, Yeah.
I was just a small cog in the whole Oregon Trail thing. That was all pretty much canned, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if they managed to put that in italics, when it got to that point, you could only carry this much, maybe bold it and underline it. I think the comedic delivery would have been there. But one thing that we like to ask about, and sometimes these questions can't always be answered. Were there any cut pieces of content that you worked on for the Oregon Trail that didn't make it? I mean, was the whole cow used? I guess is the other side of that.
Yeah, it was pretty much cut and dried. Again, it was all the game algorithm stuff had been evolved from the original teletype version. That was all kind of canned. The big jump was just doing the graphics version of it and the network part of it. So there really wasn't new content per se. It was what it was. I mean, plus, I mean, it was already had a long history. There are a lot of educators, teachers involved, and other people. So there wasn't much opportunity to do anything interesting with it other than just what was there. So.
There was no plan of what's west of Westeros, and we'll just keep going past Oregon into the ocean. Yeah.
No, I mean, Rocket Jockey certainly had a lot more leeway to do things, and since the target market wasn't school kids, we could be a little edgy. There wasn't much opportunity for that.
Now, we'll probably start moving away from Oregon Trail. But one more thing before kind of closing the thought on it is you kept saying you're just such a small blip on the overall process of Oregon Trail. It is, like you said, a very, very big game, and it kind of has this massive lasting legacy in basically our pop culture at this point. So do you have any thoughts on how it went from regional to international like that? Or your thoughts on its legacy in general?
I don't have any profound thoughts on that. I mean, just having been a kid playing it myself, I know how the effect it had on me when growing up, and it really is kind of your entry game. It was for me, for a lot of people. That's your first memory of it. So it has kind of that place in your memory and that age that really sticks with you, and that's why it can stick around as a kind of pop culture thing. I'm amazed how that it starts showing up. That you died of dysentery and. I don't think, I mean, even going back to the Don Rowich and those guys who wrote the original, I'm sure they had no idea this was going to still have legs to this day. It is, but it really is. I think it's been part of your childhood at the right period of time that really has the impact on people.
They made it a little miniature version now that you can buy a little. Which is nice because the last time I played it, I wanted to play it through Windows, and the PIF says you got to play it through DOS. So you can mess with it and get it to work through Windows, but it never plays to the right speed on anything faster than a certain one. But anyway,
I still think what happened with the Oregon Trail, obviously a lot of us played it, but then within the last 15 years, I think more people saw the memes of "you have died of dysentery" and then didn't know what dysentery stood for. Then they started looking it up, and then they accidentally clicked images, and now it's stuck with everyone.
It's there. There's no going back.
Yeah, unsee what you've seen.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube at that point. So that's just kind of where we are with it. But moving from the Oregon Trail to rocket science games, and obviously where Nate and I kind of earned our stripes working with Rocket Jockey. Before you got to that point, your studio had a couple projects, and referring to Lodestar at this point, which was part of that. That era of video gaming where we're taking live shot film and putting it into a gaming experience, and I think we both know that it didn't quite take off, not even just with Lodestar but in general. But when you were working on that experience, what were your thoughts about integrating that form of media into gaming? I mean, did you think it would take off? What were your thoughts?
No, not. This is actually a good setup for Rocket Jockey because that's kind of what pushed me to do Rocket Jockey. No, so I was hired as an engineer. The whole idea was it was a combination of Silicon Valley and Hollywood. We had Silicon Valley caliber engineers, and we had legit ILM special effects people, and that was the idea. And we pulled those things off. We did what we set out to do, but the games weren't fun. I knew that all along. I wasn't the designer on either of those games. I was strictly an engineer. Did a ton of work on them, and proud of what we accomplished technically. But no, the games weren't fun. I mean, in fact, I was desperate to put any kind of gameplay at all. If you've ever played Lodestar, there's this character Mort that's this round ball. I put in a little Easter egg where you could play Pong with him. Because there was no gameplay in this thing. I just had to put something to actually play in there. So, that was frustrating. No, I wasn't hired to do gameplay, but I knew that very much it wasn't fun. But it's too bad because we did have some just legit talented people, but not from we had game designers too that were talented in their own right, but it wasn't a game centric company. It was effects and engineering, and that's the only two of the three pieces, right? So that, I mean, we can get into the longer story, but that was ultimately once I was done with my work on those two games, I was looking for something that was just strictly gameplay. You know, just a mechanic that would be something that'd be fun, that was not about story, not about graphics, just something that was fun to play. So that's kind of what ultimately pushed me, you know, towards designing Rocket Jockey and coming up with that.
Yeah, and Nate and I are doing our best to temper ourselves a little bit, just because we are excited to ask you about this section. And I wanted to ask you if there was a Doc Brown moment here where maybe you were adjusting a clock and you slipped and hit your head on something to get the idea, you know, as far as the gameplay goes, because I know there's been a few interviews where you've mentioned some of the building blocks of it, but love to pick your brain on that.
Super
Absolutely.
simple concept that was like executed to perfection, I think.
Yeah, and so absolutely. In the other interviews, some of the analysis of how I came up with the idea were kind of looking back on it, because there actually was kind of a, maybe not a bump in the head, but it was kind of all things just came together. But let me just back up a little bit. So first of all, the name of Rocket Jockey, the game, came 2 years before the game did. When the company was just starting, got together with a couple other early employees, founders, and we're just kind of brainstorming ideas, kind of riffing on the idea of it's rocket science, what kind of games could we do? And I came up with the name Rocket Jockey just as part of that brainstorming session. No game idea behind it, just it sounded kind of cool. Looking back, maybe there's a Atari 2600 game called Space Jockey, and maybe that with rocket science gave me Rocket Jockey. I don't really know, honestly. But I would point out there's a 50s science fiction book with that name that I had no idea existed until a decade later.
I've
really?
seen it looking for a copy on eBay. I have seen that.
Yeah, I literally didn't find that till I think maybe Google was a thing where I searched for Rocket Jockey and this book came up. And I'm like, wow, I never knew about that. But so anyway, then it was just a name that I made up, and then that was all pre-Lodestar and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and just nothing happened with it. Mm-hmm. Those two games happened. I had done a ton of work on them, kind of trying to find the next thing to do. And that was right around the time when sounds so old when I say this, but when the web was just starting. So we just like the Mosaic browser, and I was actually spending a lot of time just surfing the internet looking for, you know, things, interesting information. So I found a couple papers again. So I'm not looking for game ideas. I'm just surfing, and found like a couple interesting SIGGRAPH papers on rigid body dynamics, like the physics of how you apply forces to objects and the applied, you know, torques and moments of inertia and all that stuff. That was understandable enough that I could kind of comprehend it. So I kind of latched onto that. I was doing a bunch of Atari 2600 stuff. So I was thinking like simple gameplay, just, you know, back in those days where they didn't have much for graphics or story, just come up with a mechanic and that's the fun game. So that was kind of in the mix. Because I found the docs for the 2600 and I did an emulator of that as a side project. So that was kind of immersed in that as well. And then just looking, you know, they were soliciting ideas. They're trying to rocket science was trying to figure out what they're doing next. So I started to think about, you know, just game ideas, what I could come up with, and hadn't really come up with anything. But here's the Doc Brown moment. One night I'm not thinking about games, just falling asleep, and I literally just kind of wake up and I had pulled the name together, the game idea, the cable mechanic. It all really just was kind of one of those as I'm falling asleep ideas. I got up, got an open paper, wrote it all down, and went back to bed, and there it was the next day. Really, it sounds kind of corny and cliche, but that is exactly what happened.
How long after that before you thought of the concept to drag someone into a fence and then you can just jam your engine, you know, full blast until they burn out? Because
the details came later. The details came later, but the cool part about that, you know, thing like what you're describing is that emergent gameplay. That was an exciting part of the idea as well. I just saw there's a lot of things you could do with it, so that people could discover those things that I didn't necessarily have thought of.
And to describe it for folks that may not have seen it, I mean, Rocket Jockey is almost taking like a Star Wars, you know, speeder bike, and you put a leather-clad, you know, like 1930s biker goon right on the back of it, and you have cables that shoot out from both sides of the rocket, and they can be used, like you mentioned, for a variety of things. You can pull people off of their bikes, you know, you can use it to grapple things and spin around. I mean, there's a bunch of different game modes, and one thing that I thought of immediately when we were, talking about speaking with you is it basically feels like you made the proto version of Rocket League, where you're in a little tiny car, but you're essentially doing a lot of the same things. So, have you seen that yourself through the years? Comparisons with that? Has anyone brought that up to you before?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. So my kids were. My adult kids played a lot of Rocket League, and they had to suffer with me talking about, this is just like Rocket Jockey, the Rocket Ball. I wish absolutely. I saw the influence for sure. And it's awesome. I annoyed the heck out of them with all my Rocket Jockey talk while they were playing the game. But it was fun to see. Some of the early reviews of Rocket League certainly made the connection, which was was cool to see. I don't know if the designers ever acknowledge the connection or not, but I think it's awesome. I mean, anybody who does anything creative, you don't really come up with it, from scratch. You build from other ideas you've seen. Just like like Rocket Jockey, it's the speeder bikes from Return of the Jedi. It's the Batmobile grappling hook. I mean, you get ideas and you put them together in your own way. So Rocket League, I kind of would assume is the same kind of thing. If they got the inspiration directly or not, I don't know, but it certainly felt like that. Yeah.
Well, that's the first thing that came to mind for me, because I don't know how many hours, Nate, I don't even know if you can estimate how many hours we put in on Rocket Jockey playing it, but Nate and I were talking, we were talking about it on the phone that Rocket Jockey and Rocket League, I mean, they're not the same game, but I feel like picking up Rocket League is a lot easier than Rocket Jockey. It's a very challenging game. I remembered doing some of the obstacle courses, going up and down and making sure you grapple at the right point. I mean, developing that challenge, that part of it. I mean, did you have varying difficulty levels in mind? Skill levels.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, and when you're a designer and you're playing a game a lot, your skill level keeps going up and up and up. So your kind of easy mode gets harder and harder as you learn the game. So that was kind of a tricky thing to know what is easy for a beginner versus easy for myself who played the heck out of it. The other issue is that I played it strictly with keyboard. Yeah. So it is there's levels and parts that are doable with a keyboard that would, I don't know if you could even ever do it with a mouse or a joystick. So that was kind of maybe a mistake on my part, but that's certainly a case as far as something that affected the difficulty.
How many times did you have to how did you settle on the exact amount of time? Because I've always found that the most difficult part was because just the other day I got down to I beat one with 4 seconds, but it was because at the last second I rammed a guy off of his rocket, and at the end, after I'd already broken my leg a few times. So I was thinking to myself while we were talking this on the phone was, how did you get that part right? What, the boxes and stuff here,
Getting things, that's the crazy thing about doing games is there's no getting it right. I mean, right is such a subjective thing that changes over time. You never know if you got it right until somebody, it's out there and people play it, It actually, as a tangent, makes it really stressful too, because is the game fun yet? Is it right? Is it balanced? Yeah. You never really know. And you can't just work harder to get it done. You just have to at some point just say, okay, it is what it is.
How good at it are you still? I mean, are you still as good as you were?
Gosh, no. I like I said, I've not played the original on keyboard for decades. 20 years now. I've played it on an Xbox with a controller and stuff. But that more is just flying around having fun. So no, I'm sure I'm not good enough. Even to beat the referee level to knock him off the cycle at the end of Rocket War, I think it is. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I can do that anymore. But at the time, I was really good. In fact, the last month of the game, I was playing I would work 24 hours straight and then sleep and then sleep as long as I could and then get up and work 24 hours again. And all I was doing was playing levels and tweaking levels and stuff. So I was completely immersed and maybe hallucinating a little bit by that point. But
so, which of those three is your favorite? Is it Race, War, or Ball?
I guess probably War, just because for the kind of pain you can inflict on people.
Absolutely.
But the reason for the three different games kind of goes back to that whole Atari game thing. It's when we used to play Atari game, you'd pop in a cartridge, you play a little bit, and you pop that out, put another one in, play a little bit. And I like the idea of having a different mix of different games that you really were playing, and also kind of maximize the potential of finding kind of emergent gameplay in this whole cable mechanic. Something you do in ball versus war versus racing.
Yeah, because Rocket League plays off a ball. I mean, it's
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think what was interesting about Rocket Jockey was that none of us in the house were good at all three modes. I played ball. I got good at it, but Nate, I think it's still the bane of his existence. Our older brother could never get it. So I always remembered that. I wanted to ask you, was there a mode that Nate asked you if you had a favorite one, but were you good at all the modes, or did you create them and have to rely on other people to kind of build that up?
No, I was good at all of them. That's the beauty of being the designers. You can make it tailored to your own preferences and gameplay. I liked Rocket Ball a lot. Because the physics was good enough where you could get that feel of you could really kind of fling the ball or the puck or whatever it was, and it was really satisfying. And even better, we did a version for a force feedback joystick. I can't remember the company name now, but where you could actually get the stick would actually push against you, so you get the feel of throwing something. It was actually kind of a neat effect. So I liked Rocket Ball a lot. The Rocket War stuff was a lot more fun when you're playing multiplayer. Because that's inflicting that pain on somebody.
Now we talked about this a little bit initially, but when it came to like getting the patch out, because the multiplayer was on the box but wasn't available until later. What happened with all of that?
Oh gosh, we're gonna get into the marketing and all. Yeah, so we told marketing we will not get multiplayer done. We will get the single player done by October or whatever be ready for Christmas. We just told them there's no way it's going to be done. We're not going to pretend they were under we didn't mislead them at all. And we didn't know we didn't know that they put the message on the box that it contained multiplayer. We didn't know they put in the stupid note inside saying, we're pissed too that it doesn't have it, blah, blah, blah. That was all kind of a surprise to us. And so we were not happy about it. The multiplayer stuff got done. So Rocket Jockey shipped in October of 96. We did the multiplayer stuff spring of 97. And I mean, it's too bad. I wish we had the time, because Rocket Jockey was fun as a single player, but it wasn't until we had multiplayer, like, God, this is really fucking fun. I mean, we'd have after hours, like just the team playing it, and it was just a blast. I mean, that was really when I felt like, man, we really have something here, but it's sadly probably too late. But yeah, the multiplayer was pretty kick-ass. I wish we could have gotten it done, but there was no way it was going to happen. And we got dinged in the reviews. We got dinged too for not having it in there, but saying it on the back of the box.
It took me forever. I didn't even get to try the multiplayer up until just a couple of years ago, because I didn't have two computers to network together at the time.
I read somewhere that the multiplayer patch now doesn't work real well. Like, it adds a bunch of lag to the game and stuff. I don't know if there's that's not the when we finished it. It was fine, but something's happened in the meantime that I guess it's gotten really laggy because of the multiplayer patch. I'm not sure.
That's something I was thinking about quite a bit throughout the years, because I mentioned to a friend of mine that listens to the show that he actually knew about some of the revival attempts to get Rocket Jockey brought back, which actually I was kind of surprised by. But one thing I wanted to ask you about was, do you think Rocket Jockey is kind of a victim of the time period that it came out? I mean, if it came out maybe 10 years later, 15 years later, do you think it would have reached a bigger audience? What do you think?
I think it even came out, if it could have come out a year later, it would have done way better, because that was, like I said, that the 3D hardware was just starting. We were strictly software, so it was slower for that reason. I mean, the Voodoo 3FX, we did a patch, but a little more time, we could have got the networking done. I really think a year would have made a world of difference for how well it did. But Rocket Science didn't have that much time. They were gone by 6 months or maybe a year after we shipped. I guess less than a year after we shipped, they were done. So it had to be done. So I don't know. The other thing I think is if you go 10 years out, it was such a weird concept. I just don't think it would have been made. You could say like Rocket League happened. I don't even know who the publisher of that is, but I'm surprised. Rocket League had to kind of prove itself, I think, because it's a concept too.
There's a free to play component, right? That I think a lot of people got attached to, and then all the different modes and DLCs that accompanied later. But I really, and Nate and I have talked about this before too, that I really think that model could have worked. I really do, because once again, it's not that we're talking sadism here with, how the game works. But it is really fun. Like Nate mentioned earlier that when you hit somebody dead on with a rocket and knock them off of it, that is a very specific and targeted thing you have to do to achieve that. And it takes practice. But when you do it, you just sit there and you're like, that was one of the greatest moments of gaming I felt. And the same thing goes with hooking cables and making sure they're tilted the right way to yank people off. So like that kind of stuff, I think.
A person 3 in a row, right? Before the line gives up.
What was that?
Like you can only trip line somebody 3 in a row. Like when you go around like a pole, usually you get enough time for like 3 trips, and then it cuts you off.
I think that's right. Yeah.
I'll take your word for it. I don't remember.
I played it a little too much. Yeah. No.
Oh, it's funny, guys. You talk about the cartoon violence too. I mean, that was something else I really wanted to play up if we had more time. I mean, now as the rider would get more and more damage, he would limp a little bit and stuff. But I want to do crutches, so you can run the guy down, his crutches would go flying. I really wanted to lean into that. We just didn't have the time to do all that, but that would have been a blast.
One weird question that I got kind of along this line was when you talk about timing and stuff. So the patch that came out for it, none of the cheat codes work until you have it patched. There's like there's a bunch of codes people figured out for the cheat. Were there also ones before? Like
the cheat codes were in there from day one.
Okay, because someone was posting online they don't work. I don't like the cheats, so they were saying that they were only in the second version, I guess, but I don't know, like the update.
The cheats are in there. I don't know I know the patches are in there. Yeah, the cheats were in there from the beginning, I think.
Okay. Is there any that like were never discovered, or is there any that like?
I don't think so. It was never a big secret. I mean, I think they wanted us to have cheats that they could release, for game guides or something or other. So we put a bunch in, but no, there's no secret cheats. Although they're kind of a backstory. You obviously discovered there was one rocket cycle that you had to find that wasn't part of the main list. You had to go off in the little gap in the wall to go find it. The reason for that was I did that because that rocket cycle, like, that's a dick. That's a penis. I don't. Yeah. Granted, when you're talking about rockets, you're already skirting a line of phallic symbolism. But that rocket, like, this is just a dick, and I'm going to hide this one. That's why that one is off in its own little area, because I just can't do this one.
Some of the better rockets too, like they get to a point where a crash is like almost out of control on them, like when they go because they go a little bit faster. So like,
yeah. I assigned the stats based on how well I liked what the rocket cycles looked. So the one got hidden. The blue one it looks like a vacuum cleaner. So I gave that one kind of crappy stats. So it was just all my personal preference. But the black and white one looks a little bit like a killer whale. That was probably the best one. That's one that you had to get from the refs by diving in front of them and knocking them off the bike and then keeping it.
That was a unique kind of concept too. Is that if you wanted to get it, sometimes you did have to jump, but you still had to win. Like you don't get it unless you win the match.
Yeah, that was kind of a last minute thing. I was just kind of as I'm goofing around with the physics and what I could do with the refs. The refs turned into a bigger thing than they really initially were intended to be, but they ended up being kind of fun. It gives you another target, right? If you're not playing against another human, at least you have a ref to run over or do stuff too.
The AI is very tough too. Like I don't know how you're talking about making it more difficult or whatever, but like they're pretty relentless. The other computer players, of the games I've ever played, you really had to be on your game. Like it's usually easy to drag them halfway across the screen, but like they'll go after yours. They'll go after anything close to them. Like it's intense. Go ahead.
Basically, just swarm you, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's disrespect. It's like straight up disrespect. I remember there was a time I fell off my bike, and no matter how many times I dove, no matter how how ingenious I thought I was being. They got me every time on the way to my bike, yanked me one direction, tripped me out. I mean, disrespect was like the best word I could use.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it teaches you a lot, you know. You learn fast.
Yeah, well, I mean, I like that. Like, somebody commented that some of the stuff that you have to do when you're first playing the games, like, how can I ever do this? It seems impossible. But then you get good enough at it where you're able to do it. It's kind of. I found it satisfying, even for being so close to it, that you get these skills that you never thought you were going to have.
You mean like the one where you hook their bike with your cable and then you pull forward and you slow down and back up over them and knock them off? Like, that's one of my favorite moves. Sometimes you can kind of like you initially in the match you like pull off a piece of their you go hard on and pull a piece off, so they're like constantly leering to one side the entire time.
Yeah. No, that's all fun stuff. I mean, it's funny too because you mentioned the remakes and stuff that people have tried to remake it in kind of like the Unreal Engine or whatever, and those physics engines are too. No pun intended, too real, honestly. They're too good. The physics engine, I'm kind of proud of the Rocket Jockey physics engine because of how a low end machine it worked on. I mean, I had to cut a lot of corners and really approximate things, but what it did is it gave the gameplay a kind of quirky uniqueness that it's hard to mimic with a robust, real, legit physics engine. So a lot of the movie stuff you're talking about came out of the fact that I was faking things so much with the physics behind it.
Yeah, like for some reason, like when I was playing it, one of the things it reminded me of was like almost like I ever played like Simcopter.
Yes, that's what that reminded me of.
Physics in there remind me a little bit of Simcopter, but Simcopter was no good. Like not by the same, nowhere close.
Yeah, I've used the analogy that how Family Guy has a very different animation compared to other animations of the same era. I treated Rocket Jockey kind of like that too. That its animations were very unique, and obviously I know you mentioned you didn't have much to do with the conceptual side of like the art direction and all that, but the way that it all worked together was. You can't beat it. And
it's super. I mean, it's actually the way it turned out stylistically was really kind of just a luck of the people we had on the team. From like the sense of humor and stuff is like the couple artists. It's their sense of humor. Like the names of the riders and the referee with his fez and the gut and stuff. And that was all their quirky humor. And like then the music was our sound guy. He was his idea to do the surf guitar stuff. So it was a random collection of people whose their sensibilities all kind of came together to make it what it was. I mean the gameplay and the mechanics is all me, but all the stylistic stuff is everybody else kind of coming together and coming up with a unique thing.
Yeah.
So you weren't a fan of Dick Dale, or you are a fan of Dick Dale?
I mean, absolutely, but. It wasn't my connection that got him, or even the choice of surf guitar. I'm like our sound guy. I think he was in a band that did surf guitar music, and I don't know whose connection it was to get actual Dick Dale songs. I mean, it's a brilliant choice, but I can't take credit for that as much as I like it.
I mean, thematically, it all kind of came together. Like, you didn't invent any like the names for the people like Ace Bondage or like
that was one of the artists that was all his quirky. He did all the names, Artie the Torch Jablonski and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Chris Thompson humor there. Yeah. And also like all the billboards in the arenas. Those are all inside jokes for the people that worked on the game.
Dr. Funk.
Yeah. So Dr. Funk's Nerve Tonic. So Dennis Funk was kind of he was the lead while since I was working remotely, Dennis was the lead. He was kind of the in charge of the chaos on site while I was off in Minnesota. There's some incriminating inside jokes that I'm not going to repeat here, but they're all somehow tied to the people whose name.
Was yours the plumbing one? Was it like Sean Callahan's? I don't think it was. Maybe it was something. Maybe that was the one before it. But like your name is on one entire billboard. Like,
yeah, they did something separate for mine. I can't remember what it was. And like even one of the loading screens, I look like a priest that's blessing the riders, and that's my face. The referee, that's Chris Thompson's face and his physique, he would, I think, admit as well. There's just little things in there, yeah.
Well, I would love to spend time on Rocket Jockey and just buy a beer one day, but we did want to ask you a little bit about some of the work with Microsoft, because obviously you spent quite a bit of time there, and I know this is skipping ahead a little bit, but Joe is one of only 3 people that I've ever known to own a Zune.
Hey,
and
not only own, but I had to take this out of my car today because it stays as my music hard drive in there. It's hard to tell, but yeah, still got life to it. Still living and breathing.
Yeah.
I came in for the Zune HD, the touch Zune.
Ah, nice.
So I worked on that one. The other Zunes, I kind of came in a little bit after those, but yeah, I had this weirdest track record. I worked on the Zune, which is a big fail. I worked on HD DVD, the video decoding for that. That was a failed Blu-ray. And then, Xbox, had some successes, some failures, but it's like, my career at Microsoft is a little bit of a punchline in certain spots. But
you weren't on Kinect too, were you?
I not really effectively, no. I mean, I was that era, but I did not work on Kinect directly.
Okay.
Yeah, well, but I mean, hey, the iPod cannot say that it's going around the galaxy, like solving crimes and fighting villains, like the Zune is now. So you do have that going for you.
Yeah, it's just a fun punchline to have worked on that. It's funny because as a side note, I worked with Tony Fadell, who was the kind of creator of the iPod and the iPhone and stuff, and I kind of reconnected with him, and he's asking, "So what are you working on these days?" And like, "Oh, I'm working on the Zune." He's like, "The Zune." He confessed to him that I was working on it, but yeah. Anyway.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to laugh too hard at it, but when I took Joe to Guardians of the Galaxy 2, he came down and visited one weekend, and at the end of the movie, after his Walkman breaks, the guy hands it to him and he goes, "Hey Peter, I found this. I guess everybody's on Earth is using it now." And it's a Zune.
Yeah.
And of course I look over at Joe and he's looking over at us and we're all like, "Wait, did that just happen?" And so, I mean, do you look back at the Zune and ever ask questions? I mean, what are your thoughts on working on that?
So there's another one of those cases where I came into the group just because it was an interesting challenge, just because of the embedded device, and I did the browser for the Zune HD. So I never really worked on the browser code. So I basically mimicked the Safari browser on iPod Touch, basically. So that was just a fun challenge. I didn't really, as far as the product or whatever, I never went into a project worrying about, will this be around in a year or two or not. It's more like, will this be interesting to me? Well, I learned something new, and that's how I treated it. So, and the guy that ran the software group is somebody I worked for before, so I knew he was. He got me working. He understood me working remote. I mean, when I joined the group, it was kind of weird because I got some people kind of like, who is this guy from Minnesota? Why do we hire him? What's the deal? And then I kind of single-handedly did this browser and kind of embarrassed the entire Windows Phone group with it. And then suddenly people are like, "Oh, this guy, this is why you hired him. This is, this is the kind of stuff he does." So, but yeah, it's very much just the interesting challenge, not because I thought the Zoom was cool or not cool or whatever. So. Well,
I mean, at the same time, it's like you said, it's a good thing you're not worried if the thing's still gonna be around in a year, because MP3 players as a whole, pretty much a transitional and now dead technology, made it further than the hip clips did, but they're pretty much gone now.
To me like you should have come over to the Zune project a lot earlier.
I don't think single-handedly I was going to correct any of the problems. It's funny because the Zune HD ended up being the basis for the next generation Windows Phone, which it got good reviews for its functionality. So we kind of were headed in the right direction, but after Zune collapsed, I could have gone working on Windows Phone, and I left. I went to something else. I didn't want to be stuck doing that kind of stuff again. Because I was now the browser expert, so the last thing you work on is the thing you're the expert on. So they're another good example. But I left because I don't want to be stuck doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah,
that's fair. I mean, and I'm guessing within Microsoft, the ability to move from project to project like that had to exist because you were there for the longest stint of any point in your career, and so was that kind of feast mode for you, being able to move to the next challenge like that? I mean, what was your headspace like?
It's awesome because it's a huge company and there's tons of things going on. I mean, some companies that are too small, they have their one product or their one thing, and if you don't want to do that, you got to leave the company. But Microsoft was just so big and so many things going on that, I could just kind of pick my project. And over time, I kind of developed enough of a reputation to being able to get things done, so that it was easier to jump into these different groups. And there's stuff that we did that I worked on that never went public. I mean, we did. Like we got Windows running on Xbox 360, so we had
cool.
emulation, but that project got killed, so we that never saw light of day. We also currently is it called xCloud, whatever the game streaming thing is on that's the second iteration. There was a project called Rio that I wrote the whole streaming engine for a game streaming engine for a previous incarnation of that never saw the light of day as well. So again, there's lots of things going on, something spinning up, and because I'm such a generalist and kind of had a track record of being able to jump from one thing to another, I could kind of come in and people knew that I could contribute and do something useful. So that's why I never expected to be at the company 24 years, but I was never really in any single group for more than 3-4 years. So
I have to ask you, because you were behind the curtain. Did anyone else at Microsoft incessantly make fun of the launch of Windows and the dance that occurred on stage with all the execs? Do you remember that announcement dance?
There's various Ballmer dances I've seen being done, developers, all that stuff. The weird thing is all the stuff that I was involved with was not Windows and not Office. So I was always kind of on the periphery. I was a Microsoft employee, but I never felt like I was a full Kool-Aid drinker, I guess. So, I was never part of the main projects. The group I was in originally was in Silicon Valley, so we were kind of removed. And then I switched to, groups in Redmond, but we were still like Xbox was its own thing and HoloLens was its own thing. So, so I never was really in on the kind of, core Microsoft stuff, I guess.
Did you guys ever, when you're working internally on like an Xbox, when you see some of the modifications that people made or the adjustments or the kind of projects that were worked in homebrew, did that surprise you in any way? Like some of the stuff that they came up with? Because that was like when I was in college, especially like with the original Xbox and with the 360, like just kind of the way that people modified the stuff that was made there. I thought it was kind of impressive, but.
Yeah, I only knew like the original Xbox had I can't remember, it was the Media Center stuff for Xbox, the original one, I think is the only one I remember. Again, I didn't see a ton of what people did with it. It was odd. We were oddly removed since weren't doing games and we were just basically doing operating system software. I didn't really have much visibility into that kind of stuff. I was impressed like how the work they did to try to break it, to try to crack it, and how long it took them and stuff. That was interesting because I did some work. There's one guy who did all the kind of security stuff, so I knew what he had done. He'd done an emulator for that part of the chip and stuff. So there was some really, really smart people who worked really hard in getting that right. So that was kind of cool to see behind the curtain there. And then how externally how hard people worked to try to crack it. That was kind of cool too. Kind of the war back and forth between it was kind of neat. But so no, I guess beyond that, not really.
Well, purely for comedic reasons. Is there a hidden wall in the Zune browser that contains a phallic-shaped item?
Yeah, no, I'm never trying to add phallic-shaped items.
You know what? I'm the king of. I did something once, therefore I have a reputation. So I have to ask those things because I'm ridiculous like that. But yeah, ultimately though, I've been like, after we had a chance to connect, getting to speak with you is something that once I dug into your background a bit more, it was something I was totally interested in because of the work I've done out in the private sector, but also because of the experiences that you obviously helped my brothers and I bond together playing. And so it's like, seriously, like, thank you so much for building that challenge and really just that aesthetic and everything that goes with it. It's incredible. And
thanks. It's awesome. You don't realize that how the effect you're going to have on people when you do stuff, but it's really pretty amazing when you finally you hear from people after the fact. It really is a cool thing. I'm still blown away that anybody cares about it or wants to talk about it, but I'm happy to do it.
Constantly trying to find which, like, there's certain games that I always try to figure out, like, what level of computer do I have? So, like, you know, will this run Rocket Jockey? Will this run, you know, Elder Scrolls Morrowind? Will this run Monkey Island? You know, and so that's like one of my like testing matrices. There's like, will this run Rocket Jockey? And so I kind of know where I had to be. I've been trying to find like the perfect setup for it. I think I'm pretty close to it, but it always brings me back to it. I always sit there every time I test it and I play it for like, you know, half an hour minimum.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's one of the frustrations that it wasn't more popular, but the people who know about it, I mean, it really struck a chord with people, that's just a great feeling. And that's the beauty of doing anything creative. You come up, you just make something up and put it out there, and people love it. That's just just in general, an awesome feeling. Kind of any kind of creative endeavor. So it's these kind of things are great. I mean, it's unexpected and a pleasant surprise, honestly.
I think you mentioned it's not a game that probably I've never seen like in a re-release. I've never seen like anyone put it in the best hits or anything. And I tried to look up even where the licensing rights would be, and I'm not even sure at this point.
I mean, I at some point I've tried. I mean, I maybe somebody's cracked the code on how to get the rights, but you know, the company's gone. You know, I talked to our legal counsel and our CFO. It's like, but they don't work none of us work at the company anymore. So the people who would have had the authority to do it aren't employees. And so, you know, again, maybe somebody else figured it out, but I never could. And at this point, there's no real value in the IP or anything. So I don't know. You know, people can do releases, and that's awesome. There's like been 3-4 remake attempts. So,
no one sued anybody. So, you know,
well, because nobody's made any money. You know, it's that,
right. Yeah.
I mean, at one point I thought like, it'd be a cool game for Xbox. It's like, well, okay, but then if Microsoft does it, there's suddenly some deep pockets, and somebody will crawl out of the woodwork saying they have the rights. So you just can't risk that, you know, without having it nailed down. So, so it's been just you know, I said to other interviews, like I ported Xbox, and my kids have played it, and I've played it. But that's kind of where it sits, you know. I mean, maybe someday I could dump it out on GitHub. I don't know, but we'll see.
We might be sending you convincing letters and potential bribe considerations for that, but actually we'll cut this. We'll cut this in post, so no one will hear that I said that.
Sure.
Yeah. So what are you working on now? If you're working on anything, like what's your?
Well, so I retired from Microsoft about a year and a half ago. So I'm just basically goofing around. I've been but we didn't really touch on it, but back in high school, a friend of mine and I had done this. We started this Apple II game. It was like a futuristic fantasy role-playing game. We spent a couple years in high school and about 3 years after high school working on it. And so I've been digging that out, like just playing around with like going back to code I wrote 40 years ago when I was, 16-year-old and looking at it and starting to like think about, I could maybe remaster this and finish this, you know? So I've been thinking about that, and then using that as an excuse too for learning like TypeScript and HTML, CSS, doing some web stuff, and just as an excuse to learn new programming stuff. You know, like I said, while I was working, I was looking for the new challenges and jumping around, and now in retirement, I'm kind of doing the same thing. So so far it's a good gig. I'm liking it. I'm liking this retired life thing. So.
There's been a huge like resurgence in like retro computing and interest and stuff, and I'm kind of like in an area where there's a ton of it, and so I know that if you were ever to put anything out there, I'm sure it would grab a ton of interest. Anything new in like the Apple II space is hugely welcomed.
So I've been doing. So the other thing I've been doing is kind of remake/demakes of games on the Apple II. So like taking an iPod. There's an iPhone game that I've done an Apple II version of. Because it's funny because it's so much more of a challenge, you know. Now if I have a game idea, if you on a modern PC, you can crank it, just work, it's just time, and you can crank it out. But to do it on a 1 megahertz machine with 64K of RAM it's an intellectual challenge. It's a lot of fun. So I've been doing some of that as well.
Any chances of like a Rocket Jockey Apple II remake or demake?
Doing any kind of 3D, you know, it would have to be a 2D version of it would be the only thing possible. And that's actually the first prototype of Rocket Jockey was a 2D top-down view, just to prove the concept. So I suppose you could do that on Apple II, but that'd be a pretty tough ask.
That would have been a hell of a game for the computer lab in elementary school. Would be dragging people on an Apple II through a fence.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, but are you guys old enough to do Apple II stuff? I mean, did you play Apple II, or are you more?
Yeah, yeah. So all the computer labs that we grew up in, like you had some of the newer Macintoshes that were coming out, but by and large, it was old Apple II computer labs in education. We grew up on military bases, and the majority of the computer lab was Apple II.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not like the one that you showed us in the background earlier, but they were usually the
2GS probably.
yeah, 2GS.
Yeah,
It was like consistent. It was almost like in a video game when you walk into like a general area with an NPC. That's what like all the computer labs were like in the military. You just go to the elementary school and it was like the same setup everywhere you went. So that technology, it was consistent. Yeah, the technology was consistent for us because we moved about 4 or 5 times within the early 90s to like 99. So like we had a chance to see a lot of different school systems, and I think that's why we spent so much time playing those games, because the computer lab was like the common area where socializing and the trauma of moving was something you could escape from a little bit.
It was kind of a flip-flop. You either had Apple IIs or you had like IBM PS2s, all those with no good sound cards in them.
Yep. But at the end of it all, Sean, you have survived a digital dissection. We do appreciate you joining us. This has been an absolute treat. Outside of maybe some of the games that you're working on, is there anything else that you want our listeners to know about? Anything else that's going on?
This feels like the end of Hot Ones here. I not really. No, I'm just enjoying retired life and goofing around. Maybe some Apple II stuff will come out, but, or maybe I'll get the urge to go back to do something real, but I highly doubt it. So I guess enjoy Rocket Jockey and stuff from the past. I don't know if there'll be anything new coming out anytime soon.
You send me a multiplayer invite and we'll go one-on-one. I'm all about it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you'll kick my butt. I don't doubt it. But I'm Sean Callahan, and until next time, keep on dissecting.